This is a story about Mavis the pony. Mavis the pony and the buzzy bee, to be precise. Mavis lives in fluffy gardens, a wonderful place to live. Our story begins very carefully as Mavis the pony gently put one foot in front of the other. She had eaten a hay sandwich and fancied a bit of air, so what better than a careful stroll around her garden? As Mavis was considering her next step, she saw her friend Wee Reg the puppy skipping along the path towards her garden. "Hello, Wee Reg," she said cheerfully. "Oh, hello, Mavis," said Wee Reg, wagging his little tail happily. One thing about fluffy gardens is that everyone living there loves hugs. They love to give hugs and get hugs. Mavis the pony especially loved them. So, when Wee Reg came close, she gave him such a lovely, big, warm hug. Wee Reg smiled happily. Mavis and Wee Reg played together for a little while until Mavis saw something. It was small, buzzy, yellow and black. Can you guess what it was? It was a buzzy bee. It was looking for some flowers, but as flowers made Mavis sneeze, she didn't have all that many in her garden. "Oh, look," said Mavis. "How cute." Mavis thought the buzzy bee looked very beautiful. So beautiful, in fact, she decided to give it a big hug. Well, that wasn't very careful at all, and before Wee Reg knew what she was doing, Mavis had put her arms around the bee and was holding tight. "Oh!" Mavis yelped. The bee stung her right on the nose, and it was very sore. "It stings!" she yelled, rubbing her nose. Then she began to cry. Poor Mavis. Wee Reg wanted to help. He put his arms out to give Mavis a hug so she would feel a little better. "Don't touch me," she said, not realizing he was trying to comfort her. Really, she'd have loved a hug. Wee Reg decided to get help. He ran off and, a little while later, returned with Paolo the cat. Paolo would know what to do. Inside the house, Paolo put a pack of frozen peas on the bee sting. The cold would keep the swelling down. "Will I get better?" she asked tearfully. "We'll keep an eye on it," said Paolo, "but I think you'll be fine." Mavis was very relieved. And a few days later, she was out in her garden again. Her nose wasn't stingy anymore, and she was feeling rather happy. That is, until she saw a bee. Perhaps the same bee. Mavis yelped. Terribly frightened, she waved her arms around, trying to swat the bee away. "Get away, buzzy, buzzy bee!" she cried. Now, that's not usually a good idea. If you see a bee, it's often better to stay very still. So with Mavis running about waving her arms in all the confusion, the bee was startled and stung her. "Oh!" cried Mavis. Oh dear. Poor Mavis. Mavis sat at home all that week. Her nose was red and swollen, and she was feeling very sorry for herself. In fact, it's fair to say she was miserable. Even the odd hay sandwich couldn't cheer her up. Her friends were soon very worried about her. Tooty the elephant suggested getting her a balloon. That was nice of him, wasn't it? Pertry the bear thought a trip out somewhere nice would be better. Perhaps to the seaside. Lola the mosquito thought it would be even better if they brought her a wheelbarrow full of jelly and custard and did a little dance on top while wearing striped pajamas. But then she is a very silly mosquito. They talked and talked about all the things they could do to help Mavis feel better. Some of them were so very complicated that even clever Paolo the cat got a little confused. But wee Reg had a simple idea. Can you guess what it was? While the others were still talking, wee Reg walked calmly to Mavis the pony's house. He knocked on the door. A few moments later, she opened it with big tears in her eyes. Wee Reg smiled. He held out his arms and gave her one of the biggest hugs you could imagine. It was so comfy and warm in wee Reg's arms. Mavis was still very upset, but with such a big hug and being able to tell him all about it, she began to feel a little better. Much better, in fact. So, if you're ever feeling bad or know someone else who is feeling bad, try giving them a hug. Assuming, of course, they're not a buzzy bee. This is a story about Mavis the pony. Mavis the pony and the Sniffles, to be precise. Mavis lives in fluffy gardens, a wonderful place to live. Our story begins with the Sniffles. Mavis the pony just wasn't feeling quite right. Her nose was running, for one thing, and her eyes were all watery. And every now and again, she would sneeze a big sneeze. Achoo! Yes, Mavis the pony had the sniffles. That morning, wee Reg the puppy and the small green thing called to Mavis to see if she'd like to come out and play. "Oh, I'd love to," said Mavis, "but something is not quite right with my nose." Wee Reg couldn't quite make out what Mavis was saying. "Are you feeling okay?" he asked, a little concerned. "I don't think so," said Mavis. And then she sneezed. Ah, wee Reg knew what was wrong. "You have the sniffles," he said. "Well, you better not come out then. Take care of yourself. Perhaps you should go to see the doctor," he suggested. Wee Reg and the small green thing went on their way, and Mavis the pony stood in her kitchen, wondering what to do. She didn't feel very well at all. In fact, it was possible she was getting worse. But she didn't want to go to the doctor. She had never met him, and he might not be very nice. He might not be nice at all. Mavis began to worry. That day, she paced up and down her kitchen, worrying. She worried about being sick. She worried about never getting better. And she worried about going to see the doctor who she didn't know and might not be very nice. And the more she worried, the more things she found to worry about. For example, what if the doctor said that her little yellow bow was making her sick and he had to take it from her? She loved that yellow bow and couldn't bear to be without it. What if the doctor said that her nose would never be better and she'd have to get a new one like Camille the crocodile's? What if the doctor told her she would make everyone else sick and she would have to move away to a small island where she would live all alone and have nothing to eat but coconuts? Not even a hay sandwich. And it was then that her tummy began to feel ill. Poor Mavis was feeling much worse. She started to panic. Feeling there wasn't enough room to panic indoors, she decided to panic outside instead. And by that time, it was raining. She ran around her garden, worrying and panicking. By the time she stopped, she was exhausted, feeling terrible, and was very wet. And that's when Wee Reg the puppy called at Mavis's house to see how she was feeling. He was shocked when he saw Mavis standing in her garden, wet and miserable.
"Oh, you poor thing,"
he said, and brought her inside. As Mavis drank some hot chocolate, she told Wee Reg all about how she hadn't gone to the doctor, and about all the things she was worried about, and about how, now, her tummy felt so ill.
"Oh, Mavis," he exclaimed, "your tummy feels unwell because you have worried yourself sick."
Wee Reg felt terrible for not staying with his friend earlier that day. So that night, he stayed with Mavis the pony and took very good care of her. She stayed in bed, and he made sure she had everything she wanted. He made her a lovely dinner, mostly hay, and brought her some comics to read. And when it was time to sleep, he read her a lovely story about a pony princess. The next day, Wee Reg took Mavis to see the doctor. Mavis was very worried and a little frightened because she had imagined such awful things. But her friend was with her, and that made her feel a little better. When it was time to see the doctor, the penguin nurse brought them into his room. The penguin doctor smiled. He wasn't just nice, he was positively lovely. He even gave Mavis a lollipop and some stickers. After listening with his stethoscope, taking her temperature, looking in her ears, and even taking her blood pressure, he was ready to make his diagnosis. "You have," he declared, "the sniffles." He told Mavis that the best thing she could do would be to go home and spend some time in bed. She would be better in no time.
"Is that it?"
said Mavis. "Oh, one more thing," he said. "Try not to worry."